Hi, this
Hi.
is Gabriel Andrade. I'm broadcasting from the Cayman Islands. And joining me on the other end of the line is Dr. Mary Lefkowitz. She is the author of many books, one of them which is Not Out of Africa, where she has a long scholarship on the ancient world. And today we'll be speaking about Afrocentrism. And I came across, welcome, Doctor.
Thanks so much.
I came across your book a few years ago, maybe 15 years ago in Vancouver, Canada, and in a used bookstore. And I saw this statue of, it was either Aristotle or Socrates with a hat on, with an X, right? And I was always a fan of the Malcolm X movie.
Yeah.
So, it really got my attention. And then later on, I discovered that that wasn't your idea and that you actually thought that that was not a good idea to market the book that way. But let me tell you that at least in my case, it achieved its purpose because it immediately got my attention. Anyways, what is Afrocentrism?
Well, it's a lot of things. The part that I was concerned about was the claim that was made by certain authors that Greek philosophy was stolen from Egypt. And I thought, well, first of all, you can't steal ideas. But secondly, you can't really, well, it wasn't. That's all. There's just no evidence. But then I had to find out why people made that claim, because it didn't come from nowhere. So that got me on a really interesting search.
Right. But it is true that the Greeks did look to the Egyptians every once in a while, right? I mean, Plato talks about myths and all that coming from the Egyptians and so on, right?
Absolutely. No, they learned a lot from Egypt, and they were actually had colonies in Egypt. They were trading colonies. They were kept pretty separate, but they were kind of there. So they were in a position to learn something about Egypt. And Herodotus, the great historian, went to Egypt, and they respected Egypt greatly. But that doesn't mean that philosophy came from there. It means that you can see Egyptian influence really clearly in art, in Greek art. That's where you get it, in architecture.
Not in philosophy.
No, I think that's, I'd be willing to be corrected if any text turned up that showed some signs of that, early texts of Egyptian writers. But it seems to be a Greek thing. And I'm not sure why. I don't think language has anything to do with it. I think all languages are capable of saying a lot of things. So it's not, it's hard to account for it in any way, except that there were these people who were thinking very hard about why things were the way they were, and got away from a religious interpretation of it into something else. And it's taken off from there.
Right. And how does this relate to race? Because so far you've only said that, okay, I mean, it's the claim that some ideas that we've always thought that they were Western, they come from Africa. But at any case, even if they came from Africa, it would be from Northern Africa. And Northern African peoples, they're not really all that dark. So how does it come that dark-skinned people embraced this idea of Afrocentrism? How does the idea of race come into being here?
Well, it's partly that it was an old idea that Egyptian philosophy came, there was an Egyptian university, and that philosophy spread from there to Greece. But that was really a fictional novel written in France in the 18th century, and it got into Freemasonry. Freemasonry was a pretty popular way of getting an alternative to religion, an alternative particularly to Catholicism in France. And a lot of people in America, I'd say George Washington and others, were very interested in it as a means of understanding life. And that was all based on this novel, which had universities in Egypt teaching Greek philosophy before the Greeks. It was a fiction, and it was accepted as that. And I think that's how it became the idea became rather popular. But how does it all relate to race? In a way, it really doesn't, except that I don't think the Egyptians were white. I think they were lighter skinned than some people in Africa, just for practical reasons. But skin color depends a lot on where you are. I mean, over the centuries, the reason that that Europeans have bleached out so much is that it's a way of getting more sunlight and more vitamin D into their skin than would come any other way. It's not any other kind of superiority at all. It's just practical. Light colored eyes to see better. But in darker situations, whereas dark colored eyes protect you against the sun. So Mediterranean people tend to have darker colored eyes than Norwegians, say. And then, of course, colonialism gets everything totally mixed up and messed up. But that's another topic. So I guess that's how the idea got started. And, everyone wants to claim the Egyptians, some connection with the Egyptians, because their civilization is so interesting and their architecture is so monumental. And I think that's kind of how the idea got into a whole question of race and so on. I wish the whole concept of race didn't exist, because it's gotten all mixed up with politics, and it really is not that important. It shouldn't be that important. I know it is, and I know in the United States it's become,
but this is, like I said, and PC made a great point. One of the points I was hinting at, and I'm glad, he fucking slammed that home, is, how famous they are for book burning. So it becomes a real convenient excuse to say, and like I said, she always gives herself an out. But look, chick, you're doing the same thing. You're trying to, you don't speak, as far as I know, you don't speak ancient Egyptian or ancient Greece. You don't speak any of the ancient languages. As far as, I don't know if you can read them or not. Are you fluent? Can you write it? You didn't experience it.
Yeah, I think she may have alluded to some kind of fluency or some kind of understanding of the Greek language or whatever in the debate. I'm not sure, but she damn sure don't understand the Egyptian. But she don't have the grasp of it. But I know what you're saying.
Yeah, here's my point to anybody that would also say that. All right, which dialect? It's not like all the Greeks all over ancient Greece spoke the language the same way with the same contextual and cultural meanings. Which dialect do you understand, and how do you know that that's the dialect that is a requisite for understanding what and how the ancient Egyptians influenced it? Like, you don't, not only do you not understand ancient Greek culture in the way that Herodotus did because he experienced it, but you also don't understand modern Black American culture, modern Afrocentrism. You're living in the age and you're so busy fighting against it that you haven't even bothered to study it. And we know you haven't bothered to study it because for the last 40 years, you've been arguing the same point. Your argument has not evolved. So you haven't even developed your own centralized theory about what, like the dude asked you, where did this come from? You mean after 40 years, you can't answer that question?
No, because she couldn't answer the first question.
She should have just said, I'd rather not say.
Right.
I mean, like think about like her disingenuous attempt to describe the different phenotypes and how they are affected by the sun. So in a colder, darker climate, yes, people will have lighter skin and lighter eyes. Okay, so the opposite of that, and where is Egypt located again? And in the desert.
Man, Egypt is on the freaking equator. You don't get no darker than that.
I'm just saying.
I'm just saying.
And let's not confuse the ancient Egyptians, the ones who built the civilizations, with the people who occupy Egypt now. Let's not confuse that. Because there's overwhelming evidence to show that even the matter of fact, the philosophies of Egypt that were in Egypt are so African that they came up from the heart of Africa, from the beginning of the Nile. They came up to Egypt. Egypt is the apex of that African culture, of that Nile Valley culture. It's the apex of it.
Alpha and Omega. It's funny, right? Because I'm gonna go back to something she said real quick about you can't steal ideas. Yeah, you can't steal ideas, says the thief. You know, you when you think about um when you think about the corruption and the manipulation and the revisionist history that takes place. I mean, you don't even have to go back as far as her. You can go back and look at um the Daughters of the Confederacy, right? The United Daughters of the Confederacy, and look at what they're doing in the textbooks, in which they're changing the language to from slavery existed to now non-voluntary or involuntary immigrants, right? In terms of listing, our ancestors in this country. This is a practice that's common with white scholarship. And see, because they're often not her, but usually they're skilled in the art and the science of debate. They typically can win those arguments with people who just have the information and the facts, but don't know how to organize them in a way that would be convincing in toe-to-toe combat, and also convincing and able to engage somebody who's going to offer deflection and redirection of the conversation, often moving the goalposts. This is what European scholars do, especially European scholars who are dead set on proving white supremacy and maintaining it. What this is coming from with this particular woman is the fact that she couldn't take an L. And because she couldn't take that L, she's been trying to get her lick back ever since. And so this was supposed to be her shining moment. And then, you know what's funny? Because you think about this, like, they say before the pride comes before the fall, and they speak about it in biblical terms. This is like speaking to somebody who tried to build, I forget the name of the tower, right? That tower that they were trying to build for heaven.
Babel.
Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel, right? And now she's babbling at her highest moment. This is supposed to be her breakthrough moment. And she's babbling because she knows deep down in her heart, she's trying to make sense out of something that doesn't make sense. Every when you go back, all of things come from have an origin story. And what she's trying to do is distort the origin story, because this is how you destroy the historical relevance of black people. This is how you do it. You go back and then you snatch something that was prideful from them. You snatch a part of their history that was prideful and then say this history is incorrect, and actually our people were the ones that did this. You see the same debate going on in hip hop right now, where there's this whole conversation about where did hip hop start, which culture started hip hop, and things of that nature. Yeah. You're starting to see a whole lot of that now. So this is not anything new in regards to how people, it happens when people think that you're weak. And when they think you're weak, they come and snatch, they just walk up in your house and start taking shit.
Yeah.
And that's what this is about right here. Because had she known what she was talking about, she wouldn't have been calling it Afrocentrism, followed by Eurocentrism, because those of us in the culture call it African centered. And that way, the language is a lot clearer, and it presents a better ideology in terms of what we mean when we say African centered. Everything is through the eye of the African. How does this thing affect the African? And then we utilize the African as the model. When we hear people talk like her, it's because they haven't studied. They put their scholarship in places that are disingenuous and of bad faith.
Yeah. The Egyptian influence on Greeks. So, let's look at it from the other way around. Once again, so if Greece came about, let's say between 700 and 480 BC, they say that's around the beginning of Greece. And by that time, like I said, Egypt was on its third intermediate period between the 18th and 21st dynasty. Like, a lot of time has passed. A lot of times, and from a lot of the anthropological and archaeological evidence that we have going back from the first dynasty. There were concepts and philosophies, but we know there were concepts and philosophies from ancient Nubia, Ta-Seti, that existed with the philosophies that eventually traveled up to Egypt. So this information existed before Egypt. Even when you're talking about the information of the mystery school, from all the studying and all the information that I've come across, even the information from the mystery school existed before Egypt, because a lot of the myths is that Horus sat on the throne, Horus or Asar, they ruled Egypt before Menes. So that was before Menes. That's what they were saying, that happened before Menes. And they seen themselves as the embodiment of either, whatever god that is, so like Ptah, Amen-Ra, or Asar, saw themselves as the earthly embodiment of God. But once again, these philosophies existed before Egypt. And Egypt was around the 18th to 21st dynasty before Greece came about. Where before Plato and Socrates went into Egypt, did they have this information? No, we know they didn't. They spent around 20 something years in Egypt, then came back. And when they came back to Greece, they were persecuted because the people didn't understand the information. They thought they would come with some bullshit. It took time for the information to catch on. There's historical information to lay all this out. Pat, my bad. You was gonna say something. My bad. I was on.
Oh, sorry. No, you good. I'm sick, y'all. So anyway, and that's spoken of. Like, we know that in ancient Greece, unpopular ideas were met with murder, death. Like, you got 187.
Yeah.
And a lot of those people that came back from Egypt did in fact get hunted down and killed. A lot of them. So I think she still doesn't even understand why she took the L, though. Because you're I'm sorry. You're using a lot. Jesus. See that? It's the government. As soon as I get cooking. You're standing on your academia and the books you've read and all this other stuff. And the venue was horrible. You shouldn't even took that debate in that location. You knew you weren't going to win. But in any case, so Dr. Clark just common sense you to death, lady.
Yeah.
That's this all okay. You said it wasn't this. Well, if it happened during this period, these were the only two people around. So if it wasn't them, then it had to be them. That's how you lost. You still ain't figured that, so I'm doing you a favor. Because, and I don't want people, because Mary Leftwich ain't a stupid woman. And I don't, she's not a stupid woman. But you don't understand what you don't understand because you ain't studied what you're talking about. And even to the need for Afrocentrism, like the fact that you couldn't answer that, the need for an African-centered worldview, when we have been the dude that spanked you said that the only reason he got involved in Black history is because he was told he had no history.
Right.
You're not even thinking.
That's the need.
If you were thinking about it on that level, you would understand why. In order for you to come into this space and do what you want to do, you need to be able to provide an alternative. You need to, because people are looking for themselves in places where they were told they don't exist, where they were told they never were, and where they're told there's no proof of them. And now they're looking out at the world, and like PC mentioned, they're seeing videos of statues being torn down, being broken, noses and stuff being disfigured on monuments. They're seeing books being burned. They're seeing history that we were all alive for being retold and rewritten currently on little stuff too. Little stuff like somebody saying Eddie Murphy Delirious wasn't really that funny. I was alive for that. I saw it. It was funny. You know what I'm saying? But we so much is being rewritten There's a need, but because you and all of this just shows that you haven't studied in your community. And she looked uncomfortable, probably because she realized the dude she was talking to was not somebody she wanted to be talking to in that moment. But the people that hold up this version of history that you have become a champion for, those people use those narratives to continue to beat black people and keep them subjugated, to continue to tell black people that they have no value. And we know you said out of your own mouth, which is why the dude that was interviewing you very cleverly kept moving around the fact that you said that there was, in fact, some influence there. Like, but like PC, I agree with PC, and he said it twice now. He need to say it a couple more times. This is basically a sore loser, mad because the person that beat her ass up and died before she could do anything about it.